Okay, welcome back. Go ahead and get out a piece of paper or notebook to take notes and set up your notes. Today, I promise, is the last day of the blood system or the circulatory system. It is our fourth day of this awesome circulatory system, learning about the heart, which I think is one of the coolest organs. So set up your notes, and then I want you to think back to the last lesson, which is where we learned about how the heart beats. And I want you to explain the order of events that occurs when the heart beats. And then meet me back here. Okay, you're back. So hopefully you talked about the four things that we learned in the order that the heart beats. First being that the SA node is going to send a signal to the atrium, both atria, the right and the left atria, to contract. And it also sends a signal to the AV node. So the AV node is then going to send a signal to the bundle of His, and the bundle of His then sends its signal out to the Purkinje fibers. And so after the atria contracts and the AV node sends those signals down the myocardium, or the heart muscle, the ventricles will contract and send blood out through either the pulmonary artery to go pick up oxygen at the lungs, or through the aorta to send oxygenated blood to the entire body so that we can have energy to do things like take notes on the heart. Okay, awesome. So what are we going to do today? Today we are going to talk about how the heart rate can be impacted by other factors than just the SA node. So last class we learned a lot about how the SA node is like the drill sergeant. The SA node is the one that really coordinates the heart rate. So we're going to learn about how other factors can impact that heart rate. And we're also going to learn about how blood flows through the heart. We already know the directions in which it flows, but we're going to learn about this idea of systole and diastole, and you'll see toward the end. So why does this matter in class? We are on topic 6 out of 6. We are almost there. And you come up with this. Why is it important to control the heartbeat? Why is it important for other factors to control the heart rate? When might you need a high heart rate versus when might you need a lower heart rate? So think about those different factors. And then my joke for today, normal heartbeat, deceased heartbeat, and then heartbeat when you touch your pocket and don't feel your phone. And you're like, oh my gosh, freaking out. One thing I will say, I kind of split this lesson into 2 parts. So I do the first part about other factors that can affect heart rate and then give you an activity. And then I do the second part about the cardiac cycle. So make sure you come back and do the second part after you do the first activity. But let's get going. So the control of the heart rate. So while the basal heart rate is determined within the heart, which we learned last time, how that's a really cool function of the heart, is that it's not controlled by brain signals. It's controlled within its own heart muscle cells by the SA node. The actual speed of the heartbeat can be regulated by external signals. And that should make sense to you. You should be able to think about a couple personal examples of when your heart rate might go up or down by external signals. For example, when you work out, your heart rate should increase. So that's an external signal that you are giving your body to increase your heart rate. When, like my joke, that you don't see your phone, when that happens, your heart rate increases because you're getting an external signal that's actually a rush of what we call adrenaline or epinephrine, which we're going to learn about, that also causes your heart to increase. So there are nerve signals from the brain that can trigger rapid changes. So we're going to learn about those. And there's also endocrine signals. Endocrine signals are things like hormones, and that endocrine signals can cause more sustained changes in heartbeat. There's also, if you have changes to your blood pressure level, or if you have changes to the CO2 concentration in your blood, which therefore changes your blood pH, that might also cause changes in your heart rate. But let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing we're going to learn about is the nerve signals. So the pacemaker, which we know is the SA node, is under autonomic or involuntary control from the brain. So the SA node you cannot control it voluntarily in any way. It is completely controlled on its own. You cannot think in your head, okay, heart, stop beating or beat faster. That's why we call it involuntary. And it is actually under control from the medulla oblongata or from the brainstem. So two nerves connect to the medulla oblongata that regulate heart rate, and they do two things, which should make sense. They can either speed up heart rate or slow down heart rate. The first is called a sympathetic nerve, and the sympathetic nerve is going to release the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, also called noradrenaline. If you can remember that epinephrine is in adrenaline, then you can basically remember what this is going to do. If the sympathetic nerve is going to release a neurotransmitter called noradrenaline, do you think it's going to increase or decrease heart rate? Oh, sorry, I had to sneeze there. But hopefully you said it's going to increase heart rate. Adrenaline, if you think about getting an adrenaline rush, going on a roller coaster, those are things that are going to increase your heart rate. So if you look here, the sympathetic nerve going to this cardiac muscle cell is going to release noradrenaline, which will increase heart rate. On the other side of this, we have what we call a parasympathetic nerve. This is called the vagus nerve, and this releases the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and acetylcholine can decrease the heart rate. You can actually activate that vagus nerve in a really easy way right now. And that is just by taking a few really deep breaths. So if you ever feel that you are stressed and you can feel your heart rate rising, just taking a few long, deep breaths will actually stimulate the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve will then release that neurotransmitter acetylcholine and will decrease your heart rate. You can try this right now and feel it happen. You can also do it after a workout. If you are working out, if you pause and take a few really deep breaths, your heart rate is going to go down. And that's because of that vagus nerve. So those are the nerve signals. All right. And secondly, there are hormonal signals. Hormones are chemical messengers that get released into the bloodstream, and they act specifically on target sites. So your different glands will release hormones, and they act specifically on a site. When we learn about the reproductive system, we'll learn about some other hormones that you probably have heard of, like estrogen and testosterone. So those act on different target sites than the heart, right? But this particular hormone we're talking about is going to act on the heart. So heart rate can undergo a sustained increase in response to hormonal signaling in order to prepare for vigorous physical activity. So what this means is that if you let's say you have a fight or flight response, so you are in the woods and you see a bear, your body is going to be flooded with the hormone epinephrine, just completely flooded with this hormone. Epinephrine also is called adrenaline. The reason that your body gets flooded with that hormone is because your body is preparing for that vigorous physical activity. And in order to prepare for that, it's going to increase your heart rate. Why is it going to increase your heart rate? Think critically about that. Because your body is going to need more oxygen in order to do that vigorous physical activity. So it's going to flood, your adrenal glands will flood your body with epinephrine. That epinephrine will increase your heart rate. Your heart will go up so that you're getting more oxygen to your body, to all your muscles that you need to do that physical activity. And epinephrine increases that heart rate, and by activating the same chemical pathways as the norepinephrine, as that neurotransmitter that we learned about for the nerve signals. So that's really it for controlling heart rate. You learned about two ways heart rate is controlled: nerve signals and hormone signals. And this is just a really great summary of how heart rate can be impacted. So if you want to draw this, I mean, you don't have to draw this super specifically. You could just write adrenal gland. You don't need to draw the adrenal glands. But the hormonal pathway is that your adrenal glands can release adrenaline or epinephrine, which is a hormone, and that causes your heart rate to increase. And then the nerve pathways is that the medulla, which is the brain stem in your brain, can either activate your sympathetic nerve, and that can increase heart rate. And if you remember, that neurotransmitter is norepinephrine. Or it can activate the parasympathetic nerve or the vagus nerve, which releases acetylcholine, and that can decrease heart rate. So This is the first activity. Don't forget to come back here and do the second part of this lesson after this, but it's good to do this first. So you're going to use the linked Google Form worksheet and your notes and this video if you need, and just complete the only two IB style questions where you basically explain the regulation of heart rate. And then come back here so we can do the second part of the lesson. So I will meet you back here after you do those 2 questions. Okay. Awesome, we're back. So now we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle. So the cardiac cycle basically just describes a series of events that take place in the heart over the duration of a single heartbeat. You already know the electrical signals, but now this more explains the contraction and the relaxation of the different muscles. It is going to be made up of 2 periods. The first period is of contraction, and we call that systole. The second period is of relaxation, which we call diastole. Put myself on do not disturb so that you don't hear those loud dings. Okay, so systole, this is what we're going to start with. This is that period of contraction. So blood is going to be returning to the heart, and it's going to be flowing into the atria and the ventricles. So at this point, the ventricles are open, the atria is open, and the blood is going to flow into them because the pressure in them is lower due to the fact that there's no blood in them at the moment. And then once the ventricles are about 70% full, the atria are going to contract. So this is where that SA node activates so that the atria will contract, and we call that atria systole, and that is going to increase the pressure in the atria and force the blood into the ventricles. Then the ventricles are going to contract, and ventricular pressure is going to be higher than the atrial pressure at this point. So the valves, which we call the atrioventricular, the AV valves, are going to close. The reason those valves close is so that the blood is going to flow from the ventricles to either the pulmonary artery or the aorta rather than flowing back into the atrium. The only reason the valves close is because we just don't want blood to go backward. That's that first heart sound that you hear. And then with both sets of the heart valves closed, the pressure is going to really, really build in those contracting ventricles. And then eventually, once that ventricular pressure exceeds the blood pressure in the aorta, then that aortic, also called the semilunar valve, is going to open and blood gets released into the aorta and flows into the rest of the body. That's a lot of words, so I'm going to attempt to show you in pictures next. So pause if you need to take the notes and then come back and we will do a summary with some pictures. So let's look at these different pictures of systole. If you can just remember systole as contraction, you'll probably be fine. But this first stage of systole is going to be this atrial systole. So this is when blood is flowing into the right and the left atrium. And that blood is going to flow in. The atrium is going to contract and start to send blood into the ventricles. And if you look here, I'll draw, if it'll let me. If you look here, this is the AV valve. These are, because it's the valve in between the atrium and the ventricle. It's open because we are sending blood from the atrium to the ventricle. But this valve and this valve, which are the semilunar valves or the aortic valve, are closed because we're trying to build up that pressure in the ventricles. And then once the ventricles start to have a higher amount of pressure, this AV valve is going to close so that this blood can't go backward. We don't want it to go backward, so the blood has to close in that case. So the AV valve closes, the ventricle is going to start to build up really, really high pressure to the point where eventually the semilunar valves or the aortic valves will open and the blood can flow either to the lungs, which would be this one, or to the rest of the body from the aorta. And then this is a much more simplified picture right here, but that much more simplified picture here, this is just showing how systole is that contraction of blood flowing through the pulmonary artery or the aorta. Okay, that's it for systole. And now we need to learn about diastole or relaxation. In diastole, this is as blood is exiting the ventricle and traveling down the aorta, the ventricular pressure is going to rapidly fall because the blood is leaving the ventricle. And when that ventricular pressure drops below the aortic pressure, the aortic valve is going to close to prevent backflow. Same thing. You don't want blood to flow backward back into the ventricle. You got to keep that blood flowing in one direction. And that's that second heart sound that we hear. And when the ventricular pressure drops below the atrial pressure, then that's when the AV valve is going to reopen, blood is going to flow from the atria to the ventricle, and the cycle essentially starts again. And this is just a fun, interesting fact. Throughout this whole cycle, the pressure in the aorta actually remains really high, and that's just because the muscle and the elastic fibers in the artery wall are built to maintain high blood pressure so that aorta can pump blood throughout your entire body. And here are some pictures of diastole again. Diastole, if you can just think of as relaxation, as refilling the blood in the heart. So if we look at this picture, diastole is when blood is going to be flowing into the right atrium through the vena cava or the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. And then once this atrial pressure is above the ventricular pressure, then these AV valves will open so that the atrial blood can flow into the ventricles, and then we start the process of contraction again. All right. So that is it for today. Or that's it for the notes, sorry. And here's a really beautiful summary of basically everything that you've learned about the heart. There's a couple of valves on here that you haven't learned, but if you're interested in learning about them, you are more than welcome to. You've got your blood flowing. Let me get a color. We've got our right side of the heart and our left side of the heart, and this labels the blood that will flow through the vena cava into the right atrium. We also have here, which is our AV valve. I can label it AV valve. Ooh, it's hard to write, y'all. And then we have here, which is the pulmonary valve, sometimes called semilunar valve. Basically, if they say semilunar valve, they're just talking about the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve together. And then this obviously is the pulmonary artery, which is going to send all of that blood to the lungs, which is blue because it's deoxygenated. I changed to red because then we have the pulmonary vein, which is going to bring the oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. And then the left atrium is going to open, or the AV valve here will open, help the left ventricle fill with blood, and then that blood will flow through the aorta to the rest of the body. And if you can just remember that systole is, if you even want to think of this as systole as pumping, so pumping blood, and diastole is refilling. That should do for you. Refilling. Sorry, my handwriting is awful on this computer. All right. Awesome. So get rid of all of my awful drawings. And last but not least, what I need you to do today, so your final activity 2, I want you to watch the video posted on Google Classroom on the cardiac cycle. And I also want you to copy the table below in your notes. So this table kind of summarizes everything about systole and diastole, and it should help you in understanding the cardiac cycle. So watch the video, copy the table in your notes. And then last but not least, to close out the entire week, you are going to do Exit Ticket 6.2 Part 2. So once you feel confident about the lesson the previous lesson about heartbeat, and then this lesson, which is about controlling heart rate and the flow of blood, then go ahead and do that exit ticket on Google Classroom. And if you need me, please log into office hours Monday and Thursday. Oh my gosh, this time is wrong. But office hours will be on Monday and Thursday from 12:30 to 1. I guess I can write that, can't I? So nope, 12:30 to 1 on Google Classroom will be the link. So I will see you at office hours to go over any questions you might have about this lesson. Um, and then my joke for the day is imposter. This is what the heart actually looks like. But I appreciate y'all's attention this week and kind of keeping up with the work and through this crazy time. But please check in with me through office hours, and thanks for your hard work this week. And I hope you have an awesome, wonderful weekend. Bye, y'all.